A sitting president just lost a 6-3 decision at the Supreme Court, and within minutes, he accused the court of being under foreign influence, called justices an embarrassment to their families, and hinted that tariffs could go even higher than before. Let that sink in. The highest court in the land says you don't have the authority. And your response is to double down. This wasn't just another press conference. It was a moment that could redefine who really controls economic power in America. Here's why this is bigger than politics. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs, possible refunds, market confusion, and a direct clash between the executive branch and the judiciary. When a president challenges the authority of the Supreme Court publicly, it doesn't just make headlines, it shakes confidence in institutions that hold the system together. So what actually happened? What did the court rule? And why could this escalate even further? Stay with me, because the 10 reasons we're about to break down may surprise you. When a president publicly suggests that the United States Supreme Court is being controlled or infiltrated by foreign forces, that is not a normal political disagreement. That is a direct challenge to the legitimacy of the judicial branch. The court had just issued a 6-3 ruling striking down his tariff authority, and instead of focusing on the legal reasoning, he questioned the integrity of the justices themselves. That kind of accusation carries enormous weight. The Supreme Court is designed to be independent, insulated from politics, precisely so it can interpret the Constitution without pressure. When that independence is framed as corruption without evidence, it plants doubt in the minds of millions of Americans. Why does this matter so much? Because public trust in institutions is one of the invisible pillars holding a democracy together. Research in political science consistently shows that when citizens lose confidence in courts, social stability declines and political polarization intensifies. Markets also react to uncertainty. Businesses rely on predictable legal systems to operate. If the highest court is portrayed as compromised, it doesn't just create political noise, it creates economic and social ripple effects. Investors hesitate, allies question stability, citizens grow divided. And here's the bigger question. If every branch of government starts accusing the others of being illegitimate, who does the public believe? Disagreement with a ruling is one thing. Declaring the court under foreign control is another. That shift in tone signals escalation, and escalation is what makes this moment different from ordinary political friction. If you value deep breakdowns like this, the kind that go beyond headlines and actually connect the dots, drop your honest thoughts in the comments. We read them, and your perspective truly shapes these conversations. We put serious time and research into every video, so if you appreciate that effort, subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us keep delivering content that actually matters. Criticizing a court ruling is common in politics. Presidents, governors, and lawmakers do it all the time. But what happened here went beyond policy disagreement. Instead of focusing strictly on legal interpretation, he described certain justices as an embarrassment to their families. That kind of language shifts the conversation from constitutional debate to personal attack. And when personal attacks replace institutional arguments, the tone of leadership changes dramatically. The Supreme Court is meant to function above partisan conflict. Its authority rests not on popularity, but on perceived fairness and independence. When a president frames disagreement as personal disgrace, it signals a move away from legal reasoning and toward emotional confrontation. This matters because leadership tone influences public behavior. Studies in political communication show that when leaders use inflammatory rhetoric, polarization increases among the public. People take cues from the top. If disagreement becomes humiliation, supporters may adopt that same intensity. Over time, this can erode respect, not just for individuals, but for the entire system. The judiciary relies on public confidence. It has no army, no enforcement arm of its own. Its power comes from legitimacy. Undermining that legitimacy, even rhetorically, can have long-term consequences. Ask yourself this. If every legal loss turns into a personal vendetta, what happens to institutional stability? Democracies depend on losing gracefully as much as winning decisively. When public officials blur that line, it changes the political climate. And that's why this moment stands out, not because of disagreement, but because of how that disagreement was framed. So if you're still watching, tell me in the comments, where's the line between strong criticism and going too far? I genuinely want to hear your take. We invest real research and effort into breaking these moments down clearly. So if you value that, take 1 second and subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us keep doing this work consistently. One of the most significant moments in that press conference wasn't the insults. It was the constitutional claim. The Supreme Court ruled that tariff authority ultimately belongs to Congress based on Article 1 of the Constitution, which gives lawmakers the power to tax and regulate trade. Yet during the press conference, he insisted he had the right to impose tariffs without going back to Congress. That's not just a disagreement over policy, that's a disagreement over the structure of government itself. The founders intentionally separated powers so no single branch could control taxation. Tariffs, at their core, are taxes on imports. And historically, taxation authority has always been one of Congress's strongest constitutional powers. Why does this matter beyond politics? Because separation of powers isn't just a classroom concept, it's a safeguard. Political science research consistently shows that stable democracies maintain clear boundaries between branches of government. When executive authority expands without legislative approval, those boundaries blur. Markets, foreign governments, and businesses all watch these moments closely. If there's uncertainty about who truly controls trade policy, companies struggle to plan investments, supply chains, and pricing strategies. Constitutional tension can quickly become economic tension. The bigger issue is precedent. If one president claims unilateral authority over tariffs, despite a court ruling, what stops future presidents from pushing even further in other areas? Constitutional norms aren't just about today's politics, they shape tomorrow's limits. This moment wasn't just about trade policy. It was about who gets to decide how economic power is used in America. Drop a comment and tell me, should tariff power sit firmly with Congress, or should presidents have broader flexibility? I want to hear your reasoning, not just your reaction. We put serious time into researching and structuring these breakdowns. So if you appreciate the effort, take 1 second and subscribe. It's one click for you, but it helps us keep delivering deep, fact-based analysis. Here's where things took an even more dramatic turn. After the Supreme Court struck down his tariff authority, instead of signaling caution or recalibration, he suggested that new alternatives could lead to even higher tariffs. Think about that for a moment. The highest court limits your authority, and your response is to promise stronger measures. That signals escalation, not retreat. It also creates immediate uncertainty. Businesses that were already adjusting to one tariff structure now have to prepare for something potentially bigger and more aggressive. And in economics, uncertainty is often more damaging than the policy itself. Tariffs are not abstract political tools, they are taxes placed on imported goods. Numerous economic studies have shown that when tariffs increase, costs often ripple through supply chains. Importers pay first, but many of those costs get passed on to manufacturers, retailers, and ultimately consumers. That means higher prices on everyday products, from electronics to machinery to household items. Even the possibility of higher tariffs can trigger market swings, stock volatility, and shifts in investment decisions. Markets prefer clarity. When leaders signal that tariffs could be whatever we want them to be, That unpredictability becomes a factor investors must price in. The deeper issue is strategic direction. Is this about negotiation, leverage, or long-term economic restructuring? If tariffs become a constantly shifting instrument of executive power, companies may hesitate to expand, hire, or invest domestically. That hesitation can slow growth over time. This wasn't just political rhetoric, it was a signal to global markets that trade policy could become even more aggressive despite judicial pushback. Now I want your perspective. Do higher tariffs strengthen the economy or create more risk? Drop your thoughts below and explain why. We spend hours researching, analyzing, and structuring these videos to give you clarity beyond the headlines. If you value that effort, take 1 second to subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us keep bringing you in-depth breakdowns like this. One of the biggest unanswered questions from this entire situation isn't political, it's financial. Since the tariffs were implemented, an estimated $175 to $200 billion in revenue has been collected. Now that the Supreme Court has ruled against the tariff authority used to impose them, that money enters a legal gray zone. During the press conference, when asked directly whether companies would be refunded, the response was vague and deflective. Instead of a clear yes or no, the answer pointed toward years of litigation. And that uncertainty is not small. We're talking about sums large enough to impact federal budgeting, corporate balance sheets, and potentially even taxpayer obligations. Here's why this matters beyond headlines. If tariffs were imposed without proper authority, companies that paid them may have grounds to seek refunds. That could mean prolonged court battles stretching years into the future. For businesses, especially import-heavy industries, that's billions sitting in limbo. Financial planning becomes complicated. Investors start asking tough questions. Even credit markets react when large-scale liabilities remain unresolved. Economic stability relies on predictability, and a potential multi-year refund fight injects the opposite. There's also a broader credibility issue at stake. When the government collects funds under a policy later struck down, how it handles repayment becomes a test of institutional trust. Does it proactively clarify the process, or does it fight every claim in court? That choice sends a signal about governance standards. This isn't just about tariffs anymore, it's about accountability, transparency, and how power interacts with financial responsibility at the highest levels. Let me ask you, if tariffs are ruled unlawful, should every dollar be refunded immediately or fought out in court? I genuinely want to hear your reasoning below. We dedicate serious research and effort into unpacking complex issues like this. If you appreciate that depth, take 1 second to subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us keep producing thoughtful, fact-driven content. One of the most confusing moments in the press conference came when he suggested that the Supreme Court had essentially confirmed his tariff authority, but the ruling itself struck down the specific legal pathway he used to impose those tariffs. That contradiction matters. When leaders reinterpret a loss as a victory, it creates a gap between legal reality and public messaging. For the average viewer trying to follow along, it becomes difficult to separate what the court actually said from what is being claimed. Clarity is essential in moments like this, especially when constitutional authority is involved. This kind of messaging doesn't just affect political supporters or opponents, it affects markets, businesses, and international partners. Trade policy operates on expectations. If foreign governments hear one message from the Supreme Court and another from the executive branch, confusion sets in. Investors react to clarity and consistency. When messaging becomes contradictory, volatility often follows. Even domestically, companies need to know whether tariff policy is restricted, expanded, or unchanged. A mismatch between legal rulings and executive interpretation creates instability that ripples outward. There's also a deeper institutional question. If court decisions can be publicly reframed in ways that contradict their plain meaning, what does that do to civic understanding? Democracies rely on shared facts, especially about legal outcomes. When interpretation diverges dramatically from the text of a ruling, citizens are left to navigate competing narratives, and that environment makes it harder to hold institutions accountable. This wasn't just a messaging slip, it was a moment that blurred the line between judicial outcome and political spin. Now, what's your take? When leaders reinterpret court rulings, is that strategy or distortion? Drop your thoughts below and explain your reasoning. We put real time and careful research into breaking down moments like this. If you value that effort, take 1 second to subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us continue producing deep, balanced analysis. After losing the case, instead of outlining a clear legal strategy, he repeatedly promised great alternatives that would replace the struck-down tariffs, possibly generating even more revenue. But here's the issue. No specific legal mechanism was explained, no statute was cited, no clear roadmap was presented, just broad assurances that something stronger and more effective was coming. And when it comes to economic policy, especially trade policy, vagueness can be destabilizing. Markets don't operate on confidence alone. They operate on clarity. Investors, manufacturers, and small business owners need to know the rules of the game before they can make long-term decisions. Trade policy affects supply chains that stretch across continents. A company importing parts from overseas can't just wait and see indefinitely. Contracts are signed months in advance. Pricing models are built around predictable costs. If leadership signals sweeping new measures without detailing the authority behind them, businesses are left preparing for multiple possible outcomes. That often leads to higher precautionary costs, delayed expansion, and cautious hiring. Even the anticipation of regulatory shifts can slow economic momentum. There's also a strategic question here. If the Supreme Court rejected one pathway, any alternative would need to withstand similar constitutional scrutiny. Otherwise, it risks triggering another legal challenge. Promising stronger action without specifying its foundation invites more uncertainty. In high-stakes economic policy, clarity is strength. Ambiguity, even if intentional, can have ripple effects that extend far beyond political theater. And that's why this moment raised so many eyebrows, not because alternatives were proposed, but because they were left undefined. So tell me, do bold promises without specifics inspire confidence or raise red flags? And drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. We invest serious time researching and structuring these videos to bring you depth, not just noise. If you appreciate that effort, take 1 second to subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us keep doing this work. During the press conference, he confidently declared that the Dow had crossed 50,000, presenting it as proof that his tariff strategy was working flawlessly. The problem, at the time of the statement, the Dow had not actually reached that number. In financial markets, precision matters. Numbers are not symbolic. They are measurable, verifiable data points that influence billions of dollars in decisions. When a president cites a milestone that hasn't occurred, even if by exaggeration or error, it raises questions about accuracy in economic messaging. And markets are extremely sensitive to credibility. Why does that matter? Because investor psychology plays a massive role in market behavior. Confidence can drive rallies, but misinformation can cause volatility. Institutional investors, retirement funds, and everyday Americans with 401ks rely on accurate economic indicators to make informed choices. When public statements about market performance don't align with real-time data, it creates confusion. In today's digital world, where financial dashboards update by the second, discrepancies are quickly noticed. That gap between rhetoric and data can erode trust, not just in leadership, but in broader economic communication. There's also a deeper pattern to consider. Economic success claims often serve as political reinforcement, but when those claims stretch beyond confirmed facts, they risk overshadowing legitimate economic gains. Strong economies don't need inflated numbers. They stand on measurable performance, and in moments of constitutional and economic tension, credibility becomes even more important. Accuracy isn't a minor detail, it's the foundation of trust in financial leadership. What do you think? How important is absolute accuracy when leaders talk about the stock market? Drop your thoughts below and explain why it matters to you. We put serious effort into fact-checking and structuring these deep dives. If you appreciate that level of detail, take 1 second to subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us continue producing thoughtful, data-driven analysis. One of the biggest unanswered questions surrounds the promised $2,000 tariff rebate checks. The idea sounded simple. Tariffs bring in massive revenue, and some of that money goes back to the American people. But when you actually pause and run the numbers, things get complicated fast. If tariffs generated somewhere between $175 and $200 billion, and you divide that across hundreds of millions of Americans, the math becomes tight, very tight. A nationwide $2,000 check for every eligible adult would require hundreds of billions more than what was reportedly collected. That gap raises serious questions about feasibility. Beyond the math, there's a structural issue. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods, and economists widely note that those costs are often passed down to consumers through higher prices. So if consumers are indirectly paying more at checkout because of tariffs, then using tariff revenue to send checks back becomes a circular economic loop. It's not free money. It's a redistribution of funds that originated from higher import costs. That doesn't automatically make the policy wrong, but it does make it more complex than a simple rebate narrative suggests. Then came the press conference moment where direct questions about those checks were avoided. When promises are bold, but explanations are limited, public skepticism grows. Large-scale financial pledges require clear budgeting plans, legislative pathways, and timelines. Without that clarity, the proposal feels more symbolic than operational and in economic policy. Symbolism doesn't balance budgets. Numbers do. So here's my question to you. If the revenue doesn't fully cover the promise, should the checks still go out, or should the policy be reconsidered? Drop your honest take below. We put real-time and detailed analysis into breaking down these complex claims. If you value that effort, take 1 second to subscribe. It's just one click. But it helps us continue delivering thoughtful, in-depth content.